from Dorset. And then I'm going to share about local area coordination, and then we're going to hear from Ivan. And then hopefully we'll get into a bit of chat through the chat function where you can share ideas and reflections on things that work well where you are and things that you've seen that have, sorry, 1 second. Lost my notes there. Yeah, so things that are working well where you are. So we're trying to really think about some practical, creative solutions, as well as focusing on some of the issues that we've been hearing about in that excellent presentation there. So I'll stop talking now and hand over to Yvonne, who's going to talk about her work in Dorset, and then I'll share a little bit about local area coordination, then we'll hear from Ivan, and then we'll get into that discussion a little bit in the chat. So over to you, Yvonne. Hopefully we can hear you. Is anyone able to help with Yvonne? She might need unmuting. Is there a tech facilitator in here who can help with Yvonne?
Right, I've just managed to unmute. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute.
No worries, Yvonne. Over to you.
Okay, hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Yvonne and I'm here to give you an insight into AWOC Dorset. So who are we? We're a local social and support group, and we set up with the assistance of the National Ageing Without Children group. As you can see on the slide, we've been going for about 2 years now, and we've got approximately 40 members. We cover the whole of Dorset, which is predominantly a rural county, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges that we face. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so here are some statistics which will help illustrate some of our challenges. I won't read them out, but I just want to show you how half the population of Dorset is concentrated in the urban east of the county, and how this presents a challenge for rural services in the remainder of the county, and the other half of the Dorset population, as the county is spread over 2,600 square kilometres. In addition, Dorset's got a higher proportion of older people than the national average. This can mean that it's harder for people, AWOC people in rural Dorset, as they get older, to stay connected and to remain independent. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so following on from the last slide, AWOC members are spread geographically over a large rural area, and public transport links can be poor. Just to go off track a little bit, a local paper recently reported that poor public transport in rural Dorset has been one of the reasons why Ukrainian refugees in Dorset have switched host families. Also, there's no local groups in adjacent counties, which means that we regularly get inquiries from over the border in Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire. And to talk about some barriers to seeking support, it's very common for people not to want to ask for help, as they don't want to be seen as a burden. So therefore, we can see how multiple issues in rural communities can compound, and it means that people can't stay connected and can't access the support and services that they need. Okay, next slide. Thank you. However, this can create opportunities to change things. Local groups can provide peer support, social opportunities, and information and signposting for people. For AWOCs, this can mean being with others who understand their situation, and sharing experiences can help reduce loneliness. And of course, the work that AWOC does is an opportunity for us to work together and to help shape future policy. Okay, next slide, thank you. So solutions. On this last slide, I'd like to consider some solutions. We'd like to see a society where AWOC people are understood as individuals and where AWOC issues are reflected in policy making. So how are we going to do this? For rural communities, the key solution may be in localizing services and improving accessibility for people. This would help people stay connected. And importantly, can this be achieved by working with partner organisations? So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Nick, who leads the development of local area coordination with local councils and their health partners. And Nick's going to talk about their role in helping people stay connected. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Yvonne. That was fabulous, and some excellent ideas and solutions there at the end that we'll get into some more discussion about, hopefully, in this session. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So this is about local area coordination. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what it is and how it works. And this is the approach that I'm supporting the development of in different parts of the country. Many of those areas are rural areas, or many of those areas have pockets of rurality in them. So it's adopted by different local authorities across England and Wales. And some of those, particularly places like Nottinghamshire, Surrey, Oxfordshire, who we're working with at the moment, are concerned about how they could extend their services in a different way through local area coordination to the more rural communities. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. Next slide, please. So just by means of a bit of a background, local area coordination started off in the 1980s in Western Australia in a response really to sort of centralized state services at the time who weren't reaching people and communities in a way that was working for them. And the idea was how perhaps they could put someone called a local area coordinator to be based in a community in Western Australia, that was the more rural areas, could be alongside people and could be helpful to people where they're at, really. So supporting people to identify what their vision for a good life was, what their plan was, and helping them to put that together, but really drawing upon people's strengths within that and the natural supports around them. So thinking about practical, creative, local ideas and solutions where people were able to contribute their own gifts and skills and talents in their wider community, rather than being funneled into a service system where they may become removed from their community as a consequence of those services being far away from the community. So that's where the idea was born from, and it really took root there. And in this country, it came over about 15 or so years ago now, and it's sort of taken off in various different parts of the country. And the bit that I'm responsible for supporting the development of is the local area coordination network of England and Wales, and it has developed in other parts of the world as well, led by people like Eddie Bartnick in Australia and Ralph Broad in doing some amazing work in Scotland and other parts of the world too. So the idea of local area coordination, as I said, is to really be present, locally available coordinator in the community who can connect with people where they're at. People don't need to be referred or signposted or have an assessment for it. It's just about starting with people where they're at in their own community. So people can approach them directly. People can introduce a loved one, a family member, and equally a service could introduce someone to a statutory service, a social worker or GP, for instance. They work to these 10 principles that are really about how to do really, really great person-centered, personalized support that's driven by the individual, the family, and it's about upholding their rights, their vision of a good life, and ensuring their voice is heard always. And always starting from that point of what is your vision of a good life, and how can we go on that journey together to help you achieve it. So where this is applied in rural areas, that's about the local area coordinator being present and physically available in those pockets of rurality on a regular basis, so they can connect with people in their own homes or wherever they want, and just help them to determine all of that stuff that I've been talking about. Next slide, please. And some of the features here, as I've already talked about, they're very much based in community, so they're accessible. Introductions can come from anyone and anywhere. They take the time. It's all about taking the time to get to know people. So it's not time limited. It's not like a cutoff or anything like that. It's a relationship that can last for as long as is needed, really. Seeing people as experts in their own lives and not seeking to fix people either, and helping people find natural solutions from their own community or their own sense of what good support looks like for them, if that's what they're looking for. No limit. There's quite limited paperwork. The fact they work within the wider system is really helpful because they help people to unpick and make sense of some of that stuff too. So they work very closely with social work teams and other statutory services. So they've got this foot both in that system and in the community. And it's largely reducing the demand upon that system too, where it's working because people are finding their own solutions from within their own lives and communities that work well for them, but also going on to make their contributions as connected members of their own communities. It's about people sharing their own gifts and communities benefiting from people who might have been on the edge of it, disconnected from it for whatever reason, coming to the heart of it. And it's helping people avoid getting stuck and lost between these cracks that we have in our system too. And as I said, making sense of multiple services in their lives. Next slide, please. And this is the network, as I said, some of those earlier there. You can see some of those councils who are doing it and their health partners who are supporting it too. Some very rural areas. There's 130 local area coordinators currently. So they're reaching a population of around about 1 million people. So one local area coordinator will work in a community in an urban setting of about 10,000. Obviously, that's different in rural communities. It's adjusted for that. But there's now, it's a growing approach, and our work is to support the development of it and new conversations with new local authorities, and then we help them to embed it and develop it and fund it and all that stuff. So, and then the network itself is this great self-supporting thing that we convene of practice and conferences, events, and activities and training and all sorts of stuff. And the people involved in this are some of the most passionate practitioners and leaders I've ever come across in my career. It's just wonderful to see. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's all from me. Just to give you a little bit of an idea about what local area coordination is and how it works, is one of these ideas that we could be talking about. And I'll hand over to Ivan, who's going to share about his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm sorry there are a few noises off in the background. I'm in a hotel and I've tried to find my location as far away from the sort of Wiacek as I can, but you may hear a bit of background noise. I look after, with a colleague, the National Centre for Rural Health and Care, which was formed in 2017, and its role is to really lobby around key issues that manifest themselves in the form of health inequalities because of rurality. And so I'm going to contribute to this discussion in the context of a sort of a macro overview. And I wanted to perhaps just talk you through some of the key differentiators, building on some of the things that Yvonne said earlier, that are characteristic elements of a rural milieu. So if I could have the next slide, please. We did a parliamentary inquiry into the rural health and care agenda, and these key issues that I'm just going to talk you through briefly, I think you'll recognise if you're interested in rural health inequalities, and then how they manifest themselves into people ageing without children, are really at the heart of the discussion we're having, I think. First thing is that most people have a bucolic image of rurality. You know, they watch Countryfile, they think it's a nice place to live and to work, but the practical realities are very different from that. And at the heart of the challenge people in the context we're talking about face is access to services. It's very difficult indeed for people to access key services without, as the first speaker said, some kind of intermediary support in many cases. And our research identified through the parliamentary inquiry that particularly people at both ends of the age spectrum find it very difficult to have a stake and live in rural areas because of that. Young people, particularly around employment, socialisation, and older people around access to services. And certainly once you're over 75 and you lose perhaps the ability to drive in a rural area, your choices and circumstances are very limited. That is all exacerbated, we think, by the way the NHS and to an extent local authority adult social care work, because the NHS is a huge system and we describe it as place blind. Plans and things that really causes difficulties for some of the granular working that people have identified through the discussions to date is crucial if we're going to actually support people aging without children in rural settings. And the ongoing split in micro businesses is really powerful. And then the final thing I'd say from a structural point of view, particularly in terms of international learning, that gives us some real clues to how you could do this better and how you could particularly support through a personal focus on services, people aging without children, is this Dutch model of Buurtzorg, which I can supply more information afterwards about, but it's focused absolutely on the individual. And there have been some breakthroughs in some areas of the NHS, in some trust areas, where people are starting to explore how to operate a model that starts with the person at the heart of it and the services they need, rather than the other way around in terms of that big is beautiful model that I mentioned earlier. So that's my quick canter through the national perspective and some good practice we've come across. I'm sorry there's been a bit of noise in the background, but I'll go on to mute again for you now so that you can carry on without interruption.
Thank you, Ivan. Hopefully you might come off